Last night, my kids and I, along with more than 2,000 people from across the country, we slept outside in the cold to raise money and awareness for the 4.2 million children in the United States who don't have homes. It is part of the Covenant House's national campaign called the Sleep Out. As COVID cases surge, we talk all the time about the negative impact that remote learning has on so many families. But what about our country's most vulnerable children? The kids who rely on schools for meals and for a safe place to go every day. Kids who don't have a home to go to and certainly no Wi-Fi. Joining me now, Kevin Ryan. He's the president and CEO of Covenant House, an organization that offers housing and support to 74,000 homeless children every year. They're the organization behind the Sleep Out. Kevin, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for making me part of last night's event. For months, we have been told in order to get through COVID, you got to socially distance, wash your hands, wear a mask. But for so many people, that's not easy. What does this pandemic look like for the kids that you work with?
Well, first of all, thank you and the kids for sleeping out last night. It was a really beautiful display of solidarity with a lot of young people who, not just one night, but many nights, are on the streets, not sure where their next meal is going to come from, not sure where they can sleep safely, and worried about contracting COVID-19. The pandemic, for most of us, has meant that we've had to shelter in place. But how do you do that if you don't have a place, and if you're a kid and you're hungry and you're not surrounded by a circle of love? And the stakes are incredibly high because young people are getting sick, and some of them are getting very sick. And many of the young people are hungry. I mean, in 30 years of doing this, I have never seen the breadth and the depth of child hunger that is unfolding across this country, state after state after state. One third of the children in Nevada and Louisiana are food insecure today. A third in the United States of America. Since COVID struck, Stephanie, 1.9 million more Californians are food insecure, which brings the total in that state to 6.2 million people who don't have enough to eat today. This is happening today.
So let's talk about New York. When New York City schools go virtual, that's 1.1 million kids. What happens to kids who live in shelters? I can't imagine they've got libraries with Wi-Fi.
Well, I think some do and some don't. The reality is that now all of these young people are competing for Wi-Fi. A lot of them don't have the equipment or the tools or the resources, the Chromebooks, if you will, in order to access school. We're lucky at Covenant House because Cisco and Accenture and Delta, they funded that. So for the thousands of young people who are at Covenant House, we do make sure that young people have that equipment. But as you just said, there are tens of thousands of young people, and many of them who are homeless, who are now trying to figure out, how do I still go to school?
I want our audience to understand that these kids are competing for Wi-Fi. They're not competing to get into the best schools. They're not competing to get an A. They're competing for the right to have an education. Throughout this crisis, we know millions of Americans have lost their jobs. 8 million have slipped into poverty since May. Have you seen that reflected in the demand for your services?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, last week alone, claims for state unemployment insurance jumped to over 743,000, which essentially just put the brakes on the momentum that we saw in October. So that's young people who are no longer working in restaurants, who are no longer working in a lot of the businesses that were beginning once again to have some phased opening, and they're finding themselves sliding right back down the scaffolding of their lives into poverty. I mean, honestly, Stephanie, how many Americans have to lose their jobs, wait in food lines, surrender their homes, contract COVID with no health insurance before this government acts with at least a fraction of the responsibility and the responsiveness that most of the American people have been demonstrating since we first heard of COVID-19? What will it take? The same night that thousands of people were sleeping out to raise money so that children have a safe place to sleep and eat, the Senate went home. What will it take for this government to realize the American people are suffering?
Kevin Ryan, there is no other person I would want to close out this show and this week than you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your messaging. I sincerely appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving to you.